Hey guys, CB Super. So I made a new tool. It's called the CB Backgrounds tool. It's mostly for motion graphics, but you could probably use it for other things. I think you guys are pretty creative. Before I bring it in, let me show you how I built it really quickly. And this is going to be a pretty quick video. I'm not going to build like a really big motion graphics project today. I just want to show you a quick overview of the tool itself. So the tool has 10 different types of backgrounds that I think you guys will get a lot of use out of. Most of these tools are built off of fast noise and they are completely procedural. They all animate in a couple of different ways. You blend them in one at a time. You can use a couple of them in the same background, or you can use them one at a time. And I'll kind of show you what I mean by that. So this is pretty much the tool itself. It's just, as you can see, just several different tools all combined into one. These grids are not based off of any kind of fast noise. They're actually based off of a grid tool. I'll talk a little bit about those here in a minute. And then, of course, the rest of this stuff is just your basic, combining tools in order to make something procedural, right? And then I had this text, but this is actually not part of the tool. So let's go ahead and jump in and take a look at the tool itself. I've talked a little bit about basic motion graphics being kind of broken up into 3 different parts. And then again, when I'm saying basic, I mean like this is as basic as you can get for motion graphics. So you'll have a background, you'll have some kind of accent animation, and you'll have some kind of text or text animation. I'm not going to really talk too much about the accent animation or the text animation today. I'm just going to show you the tool that I made. So if you shift space and you type in CBB, it's called the CB background tool, or CBB for short. Nothing else will come up, so it's pretty easy to remember. By default, it's already set up with a background that animates. It's called Lines. It's the very first out of 10 that animates. If we look over here to the right, you'll see that there is a bunch of different sliders. And so I would love to make this a little bit cleaner. Unfortunately, I kind of want to just get it out there right now. I am still progressing in my knowledge of how to work within the scripts, but I'm not there yet. So I'm going to go ahead and put this out now, and maybe there will be a version 2 that will be a little bit cleaner. And my goal is to actually have one tool that has backgrounds, accent animations, and text animations all in one tool combined. We're not there yet, still working on it. I'm hoping to get that out here sometime by the end of the year. If we look over here on the right, we'll see we have several options for changing the BG center or moving its position. You can see there's already a toolbar here where it moves, and you'll notice that the edges are completely mirrored, and that is by design. There's also a scaling function, a BG scale. So if I drop the scale down, you notice that it scales down and pretty much, mostly infinitely on certain backgrounds. Not all backgrounds can do this, but most of them can do this. You can also, of course, scale this up if you want. Just know that the closer you get to those backgrounds, the more blurred it's going to be. Because although they are, based off of procedural noise, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are completely scalable. So that being said, the default is at 1. You can scale down and you can scale up, and you can also rotate it. So if you notice, I can rotate this to any angle I want. It will animate in the fashion that I want it to. So this is Lines. Lines is the very first one, and you'll notice that all of the tools themselves, in order to turn them on, all you have to do is take them from 0 to 1, and you can also take them anywhere in between. So if you wanted Lines to just be 50% visible, all you got to do is bring it to 0.5. You can even have it just a light background if you want, and it will still animate the same way. Now, there is one thing to note. If you scale it all the way down, at some point you'll reach the edge of the 4K square, and once that happens, it will start reversing it because of the mirrored effect. You can also change the BG edges to either a canvas, which won't give you anything on some, wrapping around, which may solve some of your problems in some of the instances. You can also duplicate it, and then you can also, of course, leave it on mirror. Mirror is what it is on by default, because that gives the desired effect that I was looking for. Play around with this. You're obviously going to get tons of different effects, tons of different looks, pretty much from every single one of these tools. So before I go into all the different types of tools, I want to show you some of the things that the tool can do by itself. So once you bring the tool in, you'll notice if we look at it, it has an output and it has an input. So the input is for a mask. So if I wanted to, I can bring in a simple mask, say this ellipse, And now I have a completely animatable ellipse style background. The nice thing about this is the ellipse is separate, so if I want to scale this background down, I can make it thinner, and I still get the full ellipse. Of course, I can animate this ellipse over time to, do whatever I want, but the mask gives you options in order to make completely customizable backgrounds for whatever your motion graphics project is. So that's pretty cool. And the nice thing is it works with every single tool in the CB Backgrounds tool. So you can do other things too. You can actually bring in an ellipse, and then you can feather it out, and then you can bring in this border width. You can also, of course, invert these so that you could have perhaps your logo in the center. There's a lot of different things you can do, and it will animate outside of the mask, which is pretty cool. All right, so that's that. You can also bring in multiple masks, combine them into a background so that then you can transform that mask. And now that will allow you, say if this is my mask, I take these two rectangles and I combine them using the alphas into a background, and then I take that background and I bring it into a transform. Well, now I can actually transform this. Say if I wanted to drive this by angle and I could rotate this over time. Well, now when I plug that into my background, you'll get a pretty cool rotating angle effect. So you'll get animation in two different directions, which is pretty powerful. You'll notice you can also, let's go ahead and click off that, just the background by itself, you can also change the angle. So as we showed, we can change the angle of the lines. And again, this is built on a 4K square. So for 1920 by 1080, if you leave it scaled the way that it is, you shouldn't see any scaling issues. But that being said, it could run a little bit slow on your computer if your computer isn't up to the task. Before I remove the lines, one thing to note is that you actually control the line speed and direction. So if I press play, you'll see that the lines are moving downward. If I want to speed that up, all I have to do is move the slider over, and now it's going to speed up. If I want to change the direction, I can go in a positive number. The positive number will now make it go upward. Now this isn't quite as important because you can simply just change the angle. But you'll see in some of the other tools that's going to be pretty powerful. But the nice thing is that you can animate that over time. So if you want it to go one way and then switch back to the other way, you could animate that if you want right there, just using the keyframes. Say I don't want lines, say I want one of the other 9 tools. All I have to do is take this slider, drop it all the way down, and then I can come to Hypnotized. So Hypnotized is your typical, circles that are all either expanding or contracting. Now you'll see the slider right under Hypnotized is Hypno in, Hypno out. So if you move the slider to the left, it's going to go inward. If you move the slider outward, it's going to go outward. And so one thing that's really cool about this one, though, is that it looks really cool when you maybe you give it a little bit of speed, but then actually bring in like a square or a rectangle and use this as a mask. And now you can actually animate this mask over time. And you could use this either for a lower thirds, or you could use it for pretty much anything. You could actually animate this over time, giving it a really cool effect of, having a background that, moves within another background. So that's pretty cool. You can obviously animate this over time, simply using, say, the height. We can animate this on. We can even give it some bounce so it comes back. And now you have your text that would pop on right in the middle there. And that's pretty powerful. So let's go ahead and just disconnect that for now. Like I said a little bit earlier, you can always mix and match. You could bring these two in, and it starts to get maybe a little bit convoluted, but it does work. You can do this. It may look a little pixelated and grainy and jagged right now, and that is because my playback setting, proxy mode, is set to quarter resolution so that this will work quickly for the purpose of the screen capture. But I promise when you look at it on your computer at full resolution, it'll look nice. In the backgrounds, that is Hypnotized. Of course, you get to control the hypno in and out. I'm going to go ahead and minimize both of these and go to the next tool, which is the Blob Outline. So Blob Outline is obviously based off of a fast noise tool. Again, you can scale it up or down. Usually scale this up or down, and it's nice because it gives you some nice texture that's just going to subtly play in the background, which is pretty cool. You can actually control the seethe rate. If you want to turn the seethe rate up, it's going to get a lot faster. It's going to get a little more erratic. I usually just leave the seed rate, but I give you the option if you do want to change it. Again, you can kind of scale this out pretty far, and then you'll start to notice that you'll start to see the mirrored pattern of the 4K square. But the nice thing is that you can get different effects by just, if you want to just simply like move this over, well, now you're going to get, you know, a different pattern. You can also scale this up. And again, now you're going to just get a different pattern. So you can move these around pretty much infinitely. You could even animate these over time. You will run into the edge of the screen, but the nice thing is that it's mirrored. So it's just going to continue to, you know, give you something. It may not be exactly what you're looking for, but it will give you something, which is nice. Let me go ahead and stop this, and then we will check out the next tool. And again, you know, I didn't really mention this yet, but if you come down to the BG color section, you can change it from soft color to a gradient if you want. You can also change the color obviously. And when you change the color, remember that because the color apply mode is set to overlay, you're going to get complemented colors in that color range. So what do I mean by that? Let's go to the next tool, which is the Squiggly Lines tool. So if you're at the full value of the color, you probably won't see anything while you're on apply mode. If you swap it over to normal mode, you'll get kind of a cool effect where you get white and you get whatever the color is that you put. If you want to use the apply mode of overlay, you're going to have to use something in between full value. What do I mean by that? I mean, just drop it down a little bit and you'll start to see different values of the same color. Because remember, we're using an overlay which keeps the brighter parts and the darker parts of the color, which is pretty nice. So you'll have this darker color and you also have this brighter color. And at the very bottom here, you'll see there's a slider that's called Darken. What this does is it does exactly what you think it does. It just darkens the whole image so that if you want your text to stand out more, you can just simply darken the background and it will give you a nice darker color. Be aware though, this will change the color slightly on whatever it is that you're animating. So let's just kind of go back to like a blue color. I'm just going to go ahead and bump this up just a little bit. All right, so squiggly lines is exactly what it sounds like. They are simply squiggly lines that undulate. If you want those squiggly lines to move in any direction, again, just under squiggly lines, there's the squiggly speed, which also controls speed and direction. And all you have to do is move it over to the left. If you want it to move to the left, move it over to the right in a positive. If you want it to move to the right. Again, you can change the angle real simply just by moving the BG angle. The center, the scale, and the BG angle and edges, all of these are global tool transforms. So they will change all of the tools the same. Keep that in mind that if you're trying to use multiple tools, it's going to change all of the tools that are inside of this CB background tool. So let's go ahead and turn the lines back off. And that's pretty much it for squiggly lines. It's pretty cool. The nice thing about it is you can scale it down and it mirrors really well, and you start to get like very different kaleidoscopic effect. And so that's pretty cool. Let's go ahead and stop that real quick, and let's go on to the next one. So that's squiggly lines. We'll go ahead and check out crossed. So cross is exactly what you think. It is a cross that just expands outward. Again, you can change the angles if you want. If you press play, you'll notice that it's just slowly coming inward, and that's just because I thought it would be better to have some type of motion. If you want it to move outward, all you got to do is move the slider to the right, and now it's going to go outward. Again, you can scale this in, or you can scale it out. If you get too far scaled outward, though, that's probably way too far. You're going to get different types of patterns, and what it is, remember, it's mirroring these patterns. So this is one of those where you may want to play around with the different types of scaling. So this is a wrap. It's going to change it up a little bit. And of course, duplicate. By default, I leave it on mirror because there's a couple tools in here where it has to be on mirror to use. And I'll show you what those are. All right, so that's crossed. You can just use an ellipse. And now you have like a really interesting looking background that animates itself, but also is a square. So you're starting to use multiple shapes. And again, remember, these can be animated over time. And of course, you can darken these up if they're just too bright. So that's pretty cool. So play around with those. All right, so that's crossed. Let's go ahead and just reset that and turn that down. And then we'll go to squared. Squared's the next one. Squared is exactly what it sounds like. It's squares and they animate. So by default, it animates inward if that's what you want. If you want it to animate outward, square in, square out, the slider directly below it will, if you just move it again in a positive, it's now going to start moving outward versus inward. Again, you can scale this up, or you can scale this down. If you get too far, you start to obviously see the patterns on the outside, and once you get there, you can start playing around with, wrap, duplicate. That's actually kind of cool because now, oh wow, that's I didn't even know it did that. It changes color to whatever the last color is that reaches the outside, and that's pretty cool. I may use that in a future thing. And then, of course, mirror is the default. And don't forget, like, you can even bring in another tool that has its own alpha, like the CB Liquid tool. I could bring in the CB Liquid tool, and I can use this as a mask. And now I've just created. Look at that. Tell me that's not cool, right? So play around with this. Just remember that you can use anything as an alpha channel. You can bring it in and you can mask out, and now you give almost an organic feel to something that is very procedural. That being said, let's go ahead and jump out of squared and let's go to the spin cycle. Spin cycle is probably my favorite tool. It's the one that I had the most fun building. Let's go ahead and BG scale it all the way back down, and it's a little dark, so I'm going to lighten it up a little bit. All right, so this tool is, again, it's a procedural animated tool. You'll notice that it animates in a very almost erratic fashion, and the way that it does that is I actually used a motion path around the center to change that. But here's the really cool thing about this one is that I can actually take this little dot and I can move the center of this tool around, and that's actually going to give you drastically different effects. So if I come in here and I scale this down, you can actually start to see that it creates some kind of kaleidoscope effect, which is really cool. And if this is too strong, of course, all you have to do is come over here and you can darken it up if you want. And don't forget, as always, we can always come in here and we can add a mask. And now we get a really interesting thing. Is it cool? I don't know. It's pretty cool that you can do that. Just keep that in mind that there's a lot of, it's almost limitless by using mirror. And of course, we can change this from mirror. It doesn't have to be mirror. We can change it to canvas. We can change it to the wrap, change it to duplicate. Duplicate's kind of neat, gives it a really interesting look. And so the nice thing about this is you can actually move this around, which is pretty cool because now when you do this, you actually get a different effect completely. Some of it will move, some of it won't because of where the motion path actually is. Personally, I think this one's pretty cool, and it was fun to actually create because it took quite a bit of thinking in order to be able to move this center. One nice thing about this is that you can actually change the repeat style. So if you change it to once, you're going to get a different look, versus if it's on, say, ping pong, you're going to get a slightly different look. And even repeat is a little bit different from ping pong. They're pretty close, but it is a little different. So keep that in mind. Play around with it, and again, feel free to mask this up to get even different effects. All right, and then next we'll do inked. So inked is kind of interesting. Inked is similar to a regular fast noise, and it is pretty much just a fast noise. The nice thing, though, is you can kind of start to scale it down. You can move it around, and you'll see that you're going to get a different look. So that's pretty cool. Of course, you can angle this by rotating it. You can scale it downward if you want. And instead of duplicate, I would leave this one on mirrored. You could sometimes get some interesting effects just by scaling it up or down. This is just a simple ink cloud. You can really easily just add some kind of mask or ellipse, and now you get a very interesting look. You can have your title in there. You can scale this down, and that's interesting. That actually kind of looks like a moon with some clouds in front of it or something. That's pretty cool. All right, so the last two are based off of a grid design. So the first one is the cube grid, and by default it looks like this. So there's two actually. There's the cube grid, right? There's the cubes, and then there's also the dot grid. This is the dots. The nice thing about both of these is you can scale them down to make a whole bunch of smaller dots. You can scale it up to make, just really large dots if you want. You can really play around with this to get different looks. Interesting though is that these are basically the same tool. I just changed them up a little bit, but they're instants. So you control either of these tools by using the two sliders below them. It's the cube dot left right or the cube dot down up. And they are exactly what you think they are. If you move the slider to the left and you move the slider to the left on this one, it goes left and down. So when you animate, it just animates over time. It's going to be basically an infinite loop. You could leave this on for hours if you wanted to, for whatever reason. It is amazing how difficult this one was to construct, just because it is not based on a repeater like you would maybe think. It's actually based off of the grid tool and using some different other tools, and I'll kind of show you a little bit after at the end if you're interested. I'll show you how I kind of built that one. So that's pretty much it. When you come down here, you can change the BG color types. Say if you want it to be a gradient, you can do this in a gradient. You can also animate these gradients over time, which is pretty cool. You could have this control wipe on. Of course, there's 100 different ways you could do this. It doesn't have to be a linear, it could be a radial. You can bring the radial in, and now you get a grid that kind of emanates from the inside. And then if you want to change these colors, it's just a matter of, picking your color to add it to your gradient. And now you get a very interesting looking thing. And then, of course, remember, we can always bring in rectangles and we can animate these over time. And you can make a really interesting animated lower third. And like I mentioned, a super easy way just to, make this stand out is you can darken this up quite a bit. So anyways, just play around with it. Tons of different things that you can do with this one tool. All right, so that is the CB Backgrounds tool. I hope you guys get some use out of it. I've got a lot of other tools that are coming. I've got some good tutorial ideas that I want to throw out there. I'll probably throw them out a little bit later in the next couple weeks. So, that's pretty much it. If you guys like this video, make sure to like and subscribe. If you guys have any questions, leave them down in the comments, and I'll try to get back to you. I'm not making as many videos based off of comments just because I have a lot of videos that I'm working on right now. But, oh yeah, I did mention that I would show you how I made some of these tools, so I'll go ahead and show that to you real quick. The hard one was, of course, this grid tool. And the reason it was hard is because in After Effects, it's really easy to make a procedural grid tool, and it's easy to animate that grid tool because, for whatever reason, After Effects knows that's something you want to do. I don't know why DaVinci doesn't make it a little bit easier for us to do things in that procedural manner. So what I did was I took a background and then I added this grid tool. And if you ever want to use the grid tool, play around with it for yourself, just type in grid, not the grid warp, it's the actual grid tool. And it's going to bring in a tool that creates this grid. And you can customize that grid a little bit, and it's super useful. You can do different things. You could put the grid on a 3D plane, and you could do some really cool animations with that. In fact, maybe I'll do that in the next video because I've been meaning to do that. All right, and then I just added this erode dilate to make the grid lines thicker. I wanted the grid lines really thick, and now you'll notice that when you do that, it makes these really nice boxes. Now, I could have just used these boxes as is, but I wanted them to be changed a little bit because I didn't want this hard square box, although you could use that and you could make this into an animatable tool. So what I did was, first, because the grid doesn't output an alpha, see if I click on this, not on the bitmap, but on the erode dilate, if I click on the alpha, you'll see that the alpha is still blank. So I had to turn that into an alpha, and of course by doing that, all I did was bring in a bitmap and turn it to luminance, right? And so that gave us an alpha, and now I was able to use the CB meld tool, which I don't think I've actually put that out. It should be, I think it's on the website. If it's not, I'll make sure to put it up there. But all that does is, that blob effect that I do, it just does that blob effect. But the nice thing about that is when you add the blob effect, you can actually turn the grid into dots. And that was actually the first tool. It was just dots because that was the original plan. And then I actually saw that you can, dial it down a little bit, and then you get this really neat you get this really neat cube look. So I thought that would be kind of cool to animate that over time. And I had to transform it, and this was kind of the hard part, was when you mirror something, it's kind of difficult because the edges of when it starts to get mirrored, they're never going to be perfect. So what I had to do is I first had to transform it, before I could actually put it in a mover. And then once I put it in the mover, that's how I was able to animate it over time. And this cube mover, I've showed this before in other tutorials where you just add an expression to the center, and then you come in and you use a couple of these dials down here, and then you just add in a simple expression, time times n1, and I had to divide it by 100 because it was really, really fast. So that's pretty much it for the dots, and it's the exact same with the dots. They're just dots, and they're inverted instead of the as you can see, the cubes are actually, the white is on the outside, and you could invert that if you want. It's pretty easy. The spinning is pretty interesting because what I actually animated was the gradient start for a cross, and you'll notice that there is a motion path. And if you haven't seen how to do a motion path, you can check out my motion path video. It'll be up in the upper right. All I did is I added in this motion path so that the start would animate constantly, and it just goes round and round. And of course I added an expression to that, and the expression is really simple. It's just you can change the actual spin speed, and then you also have the path with the displacement. So the displacement is just, you know, a simple expression that's tied into the displacement of the expression. Pretty easy stuff. The squares are pretty basic. All it is a fast noise, right? And so whenever you want to make a really nice hard line, you have to use a gradient usually. And you're going to probably want to take these, and to make them nice and straight and hard, you're going to have to kind of like get these really close to each other. And then I just put it in the gradient type of square. And then I ping-ponged it so that if it wasn't on ping-pong, if it was just once, you just get this really big square, which doesn't do anybody any good. But the nice thing is if you add a repeat, and repeat and ping-pong were too close to each other, so I didn't really add in the functionality that you could use that for. Cross is pretty much the same way. I just used the cross instead of the square. Squiggly lines are pretty simple. Again, it's just a gradient. This time I actually left the seed and the pattern. So I turned down, instead of having it, you know, if the contrast is all the way up, I turned the contrast down to somewhere in the center. And then of course very little detail. And anytime you get multiple lines, it's usually because there is a ping pong or a repeat. In this case it's ping pong. Repeat lines are just going to be a little bit different. Nope, that's a square. Go back to the squiggly line. So you can ping pong or repeat it. The blob lines is exactly what you think it is. It's just it's got some seed obviously to it. It's not discontinuous, and it's not inverted like some people might have thought. It is on unigradient, and it's just really thin. You'll notice there's almost no white, but there is white. I just want, and of course, like, you can change this up. You can actually come into this tool if you want to change it up, and you could, you know, you could maybe do it like this. You know, it's up to you. You guys play around with it. Hypnotized is exactly what you think it is, just circles that ping pong and emanate outwards. And then lines is probably what started it all off. And again, just based off of a fast noise. I mean, it's amazing, this one tool, the thousands of things that you can do with a fast noise tool. Alright, so that's pretty much it. If you guys like this video, make sure to like and subscribe, hit that bell notification, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.